feature presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Perkins, for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I was listening to the Kingcast the other day, and producer James Wan was on the show, and he was talking a little bit about the process of developing the monkey. And they got into a conversation about adaptation, and that's kind of where I wanted to start with you in this conversation. And specifically, do you think Stephen King's short stories work better as feature adaptations compared to his longer novels?
I mean, I don't know if there's a one for one. I think it's different for everybody how they kind of approach it. It's like as a writer when you're developing something, that sort of the task is to find the hook or the way in is maybe the better way of putting it, which kind of becomes the hook, I guess. And so that becomes kind of like, well, as a filmmaker, are you fixated on sort of the personal aspect, which is what kind of I think I try to put forward? Are you fixated on the set pieces? Are you fixated on the thing? Like, what's the thing that you're going to connect to as the author of the adaptation? So, I think everything is possibly easy to adapt from, and everything has its challenges. I was happy that there was sort of not enough in the short story because it gave me a lot of room to fill in my own stuff, which happened to fit pretty well.
So does that give you that creative permission then to expand and add things that are personal? Because that was something I was really curious about. Do you find that the monkey is personal to you as a filmmaker? Because every project that someone works on, there's a personal element, even if it's not their own material.
I sort of like my system insists that it's personal. Otherwise, I kind of don't know um, kind of what I'm doing or what I'm talking about. Like it's so important to feel like you're an authority on the material that you're doing. And so it always has to grow from something specific that you know to be true or an experience you've had or something you feel about people or something you kind of understand about life. And um, yeah, I think that in the case of this short story, I kind of just was like, oh, it's a father son. Oh, it's an old thing that's in a closet. Oh, it's sort of like trying to reconcile relationships in families. It's about this thing that happened in the past, and all these things are sort of connected on sort of like a chain link for me. And once I kind of got into the flow, it was easy to do.
Do you feel any catharsis or any sort of new perspective on your own relationships to your family or friends in terms of making a movie like this? I know you've been very candid about talking about your relationship to, your mother and your father and your films. And I really love the performance by Tatiana Maslany specifically. And you can feel this kind of warmth that generates in that first act.
I mean, I think luckily I'm pretty resolved sort of spiritually on most of these relationships. I'm not kind of like nothing is kind of raw or like in pain. That seems like I feel like going into making a movie where you're like, this is gonna make me feel better. It seems like a pretty dangerous proposition. I wouldn't advise it. I think you kind of have to go into the clearer head than that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because I remember Steven Spielberg talking about that with the Fablemans, where it was, him working on things, but it necessarily wasn't, a one-to-one in connecting those two aspects. I'm curious as well with when you're adapting a Stephen King short story, do you ever think about or are you ever overwhelmed at all by the fact that people are going to look at it not just in terms of where the monkey falls in your own filmography, but where it falls in the King canon of adaptations because there are so many and they vary in terms of style and substance.
I think probably in my own personal sort of minefield of potential head trips, like how I measure up to maximum overdrive or something is probably not really high on my list of things to kind of like be neurotic about. I think I'm probably much more kind of like turned inward than that. Because also at the end of the day, it's like I have no control over. I kind of, in a sense, have no control over the finished product. I mean, I've got some control over the finished product because I start it, right? So it's like something, I think it's Mary Poppins, like something well begun is nearly finished or something like that. Is like, I'm paraphrasing, but I think it's something like that. And so I think that if you get off on the right foot, you're going to be okay. But so many things happen, so much changes, so many people contribute in so many unexpected, great and sometimes not great ways. So sort of trying to see down the line to the result, I think is kind of bad medicine.
Yeah, well, you mentioned also Maximum Overdrive, and I'm glad you kind of did because I was curious, was that a film that you were referencing in this? Because there are references and Easter eggs to other King stories, but there's a lawnmower bit in particular that reminded me of a group of kids being run down by a steamroller.
It's funny. It's funny. I didn't do the sort of hold one book open with one hand and type with the other kind of this like, oh, I'm going to put that into that. But I did, in hindsight, discover that I had included a lot of things more from King's sort of biographical writing. So from his on writing book, there's a lot. I went back and read that after we finished shooting, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff in here that I pocketed somewhere in my subconscious. And when I was writing, I was like, oh yeah, the babysitter will be kind of like this, and it turns out that's the babysitter from his childhood. Oh, the Ramones. He's a fan of the Ramones, so one of the characters is going to look like the Ramones. I wasn't like, oh, the Ramones, but it just came out that way, and it's nice when it does. It's nice when your kind of your unconscious is active. I think that's then you're in good shape.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Ramones as well, just in terms of even like the Pet Cemetery song when Rowan Campbell shows up on screen, or even, Halloween Ends as well, because I think that's a very underrated horror comedy in some regards as well. You've written scripts and worked with other screenwriters like Rob Hayes and Nick Leppard. Do you have a preference when developing material? Does that change your relationship to what you're directing if you have shared or collaborated with another writer?
Yeah, I mean, sort of elementally from the ground up, it's a different thing, and I think ultimately, you know, it's always going to be I'm always going to infuse myself back into it, and I'm always going to sort of on the day or the night before or something like that. It was tricky with Keeper because I was during the writer's strike, so I really wasn't allowed to kind of write anything. So I could only really ever say things out of my mouth, kind of from a directorial place. But when it came to Gretel and Hansel, I ended up, to be fair, writing pretty much. I mean, I don't know what I should be saying, but I wrote all the dialogue. Like everything that gets said in that movie, I wrote, and sort of the framework of the narrative was there and was Rob's, and then I just kind of got hooked on the poetry of how people talked, and I ended up writing, I would say, mostly what people said.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I was always confused with how it was presented, even just in the marketing of the film, because you were mentioned sometimes and Rob was mentioned at other times. Also, King is such a prolific writer. You have gone on this streak with Long Legs, now The Monkey, and you mentioned Keeper. Does working back to back on films change your approach at all? Do you look to other directors who have jumped from one project to another?
You, like anything that you practice, you get better at it. And so by the time we got to sort of doing additional photography on Keeper, which we got the sort of the privilege to be able to do, I was pretty good at the job. Do you know what I mean? Like when I started Longlegs, which was the first in the triptych, I was uneasy, and I was kind of still figuring out what the job kind of was. But now that when you do the process of sort of script to photography to cutting to finishing, script to photography to cutting to finishing. By the time you get to script to, oh, I kind of understand photography. Oh, I know how to look ahead now to cutting when you're shooting, and then I know how, you know what I mean, to finishing is always kind of in your mind. So yeah, the stream is really it's worked out for me. I mean, I can't say I'd recommend it. I'm fucking exhausted and spun out, but here they are. We have three decent movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited for Keeper. You mentioned photography. Of the six features you've made, you've worked with five different cinematographers. Do you ever feel like you're starting from scratch when collaborating with a new DOP?
I think that because I sort of know what I like so distinctly, and I think some of it sort of surprises DPs when we kind of get there. For example, and this is a funny one, but headroom in the frame is not something that's kind of de rigueur. Like not everybody does that, and I can't imagine not doing that. Like having kind of an almost comedic amount of headroom in every frame for me is it's just like the way it looks. Like I can't look at it any other way. And when I see, especially TV shows, but movies, when everybody's right up at the top of the thing, I'm like, where's the where's the energy? You're losing so much energy. You're losing so much mystery. You're losing so much sort of viewership and kind of voyeuristic sort of like energy around the frame if you don't have this nothingness above people's heads. So there's always a few kind of touchstones that end up just kind of making their way into it. And people have been, like Nico Aguilar, who shot The Monkey, was very kind of reverential to the work that had come before it, right? He really admired what Gallo had done on Gretel and Hansel, and really admired what Andres had done on Longlegs. And so there's a certain, it's kind of like guys respecting other guys, game respecting game, and kind of trying to keep a flow together. So when you know what you like, it helps. I guess everybody doesn't, but I don't know. I know what I like, and usually people can respond.
Oh, definitely. There's a consistency to your work and the way that you shoot and the ominous nature of even the way the monkey looks, especially in the dark. Mr. Perkins, I have to wrap with you, but thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, dude. Talk to you next time.